Let's take a focused look at Mac Studio M4 Max, comparing the base to the top silicon and determining if the upgrade is worth it for a pro photo and video workflow, and why you may just have to upgrade the silicon to the top one anyway. Let's jump right in. I'm ArtIsRight. As usual, I'll be sharing lots of information. Please pause this video so you can analyze the result yourself in addition to the analysis I'll be sharing with you. Timestamp will be in the description, although it may not be available when the video launches. With that said, one thing that all of you can definitely do to help me out is to tap on that like button. This way YouTube algorithm will push this to an even larger audience. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please consider doing so. This way we can grow the channel. This is fully a self-funded channel, so if you find information helpful, please consider supporting the channel. I'll leave a link to my tip jar in the description. YouTube super thanks work. You can also join the channel membership. And if you can help me share this video with 3 other people, I would greatly appreciate that. And the only thing that you can do to help out the channel is by tapping on that like button and subscribing. That works equally as well. Lastly, this is a one-person run channel, so please remember to be kind to the comment. I'm only human, I make mistakes. Do let me know, I will correct them in a future video. With this said, this is more of a shorter focus look and condensed version of the full video that I have done. I'll leave a link to this video in the description too, so you can definitely check that one out. That will have a lot more in-depth comparison chart, but we're not going to be looking granularly at these machines as we would be with the other videos. So this is the reason why I'm making this particular series. Now we're going to be taking a look at this, comparing the M4 Max, the base, and also the top silicon. Now when I'm referring to the base on the top, I'm only talking about the silicon. We're not talking about maxing out the machine or anything like that at all. So I just want to be clear on that one. And a couple of thoughts that I have regarding this is the price point and also the memory. So the base M4 Max comes with only one memory option available, and that is 36 gigabytes of memory. You cannot upgrade this. You can bump up the SSD as much as you want, but if you need more memory, more RAM in the system, you're just stuck with 36. So what to do if you want to upgrade the memory? Well, you have to upgrade to the M4 Max top silicon, to which you're now bundled in with a memory upgrade automatically. So it goes from 36 to 48. That's the reason why you see the memory discrepancy of that 12 gigabyte. Now this opens up the possibility for you to upgrade to 64 and 128 gigs with all the SSD option available beside the 16 terabyte one. That has to be like the ultra silicon for you to access that. But this gives you an idea as far as upgrading from the base to the top silicon. And like I said, if you want more memory in the system, you have to bump up the silicon anyway. But as it stands, if we just choose the stock configuration, we're looking at a $500 price delta. Now, one thing that I will say is I found the base one already on sale, at least in the US anyway. You can probably get that for like around $1,699, $1,700. So the delta is even a little bit more, but for now, for this comparison, we're going to set the price delta at $500 for now. All right, with that said, we're also going to be taking a look at these other machines in the lineup and also the M4 Pro to see how that really performs. Configuration and buyer guides will be towards the end of this video. And remember, with Apple Silicon, there are 2 segmentations, consumer leaning and pro oriented. This is the pro oriented chip, so you're pretty much good to go here. To get the most performance per dollar, I have made this upgrade priority list. When we start to get this high up in the silicon game, it's getting closer to the top of the pyramid, it doesn't really matter quite as much, but the memory is still going to give you the most performance. From there, the amount of memory itself is going to lock you into a chip family. So let's say you want to get the M4 Pro, you can't get 128 gigabytes there. You have to bump up the chip family anyway. So these are in lockstep with each other. If you have extra funding left, SSD upgrade is not a bad idea. Although this is going to show you more benefit on the lower end system, on the more entry system with less memory on the system itself compared to the higher end system. And lastly, chip variants. There's not really a lot of variants you can choose from. You can really bump, but you're forced to bump the chip variants to get more memory anyway when it comes to these silicons. My initial thought is that these M4 Max generation are really good performing computers, and I feel like they're going to be the sweet spot for a lot of photographers out there and also video pros. Although video, you can really benefit from the Ultra double encoder decoder engine, but I still think Max is a really great contender, especially if you do mixed workflow. One thing that I do want to remind us is to think about the workflow that you do mostly with your computers, the apps that you use, and keep that in mind as we're going through these charts, because it's going to really show you which machine you might want to configure for your use. Now, with all of this said, what it really comes down to at the end of these days is just justification. Can you justify upgrading? Does it make any sense upgrading? Do you have the budget to upgrade? And lastly, where you are in your creative career is going to say a lot about whether you want to upgrade or not. Because for instance, I just want to get things done fast. I have so many things to do, and being able to do things that slight faster, it's actually worth it for me. But it might not be like that for everyone, right? Especially if you're starting out, it might be better just to wait just a few minutes longer in order for you to get the task done, but you save the money right then and there. So where you are in your career is going to matter a lot too. Now, I'll be taking a pro perspective on this, and we'll be taking a look at a single app silicon testing. So I'm going to just literally comparing one app only and doing the export, import, and so forth. This is giving me an objective look rather than a subjective one at the way how the silicon's performing. That's the reason why I do this, but I also go into depth into other areas. If you find it's not quite as helpful, I'm sorry. There are other channels that does more of like the touchy-feely thing about how fast the machine perform. But for those of you to watch the channel, you know what you've come here for. There are many other configurations out there. I can't configure everything. If you happen to live in SoCal, you max out your machine, you want to have me borrow some time on your machine, that would be fantastic. Feel free to DM me for that. So I've also done a lot of referencing, comparative testing, pulling different machines out to make sure that under different operating system and different app versions, the performance are similar to the result that we have in the past. However, when it comes to these testing cycles, some have asked me why are the number different? And the reason why is because if it's related to the products being launched, for example, the Mac Studio is being launched in this cycle along with the MacBook Air, all of the Mac Studios and all of the MacBooks Air get retested for this particular cycle launch. This way we get the most accurate number possible. So yeah, a lot of retesting. So yeah, optimization, we have that and we're starting to see that more in the apps now. But I would say in general, optimization is still baseline on the most sold silicon, which are going to be the pros and kind of the max. You're not going to see a full optimization for the ultra or anything like that because there's just only so many computers being sold at those like high end. The design, I'm not really going to talk about that much. They're exactly the same when we compare to like the max to the max on this one. And with regards to the fan, because we're talking about the max to the max, the fan is pretty much just about the same. When you start to go in, for example, from the Mini to the Studio, Mini M4 Pro to the Mac Studio M4 Max, obviously the M4 Max is going to run more silent. The fan's going to kick in a lot less, although it did kick in. And if you want something that's even more silence overall, I would say the Ultra is the way to go because it has better cooling on that one. But I think Apple knows this and they have released the low power mode, which fans will kick in less often or not spin up to quite as high of a speed. Now the calibration did pass on these for both hardware and software calibration, so we're good to go there to get good colors on day one. And my recommendation is always, if you're just getting a new machine, set it up as a new machine, especially if you're coming from the Intel generation and if you are a Creative Pro. It's just nice to start out fresh. This is how you read the spec for the machine that I am about to share with you. And with that in mind, let's quickly talk about SSD. They're modular. You can probably buy third-party ones and plug them in now, though it requires a total reset of your system and everything. So for the most part, I'm still going to say get the SSD for the size that you need and just go with that. Don't worry about the speed because they are pretty much mighty fast nowadays. You're not going to have a problem with that. And the other thing too, I will also say is you don't need the fastest SSD possible. I've actually ran a test on this. I'll leave a link to this video in the description so you can definitely check that out so you can save some money there. When it comes to the amount of memory, the RAM on the system, definitely configure as much as you're going to need into the future as well because you cannot upgrade this. The only way for you to really upgrade the RAM is to buy a brand new machine. So something to think about there. If you're not sure if the amount of memory that you have work or not, well, simply enough, if you're a creative, you're ready to use a Mac, restart your computer, launch Activity Monitor, go into the memory tab, and then tile your window in a way that you can see the memory pressure and just monitor that as you go through your creative workflow. If you're in green, you're pretty much good with the amount that you have. If you're kind of like in the middle or getting into yellow and red, definitely want to consider getting more memory for your system. An app that I use that I'm not sponsored by is iStat Menu, but it keeps stats for like 28 days. I find that really helpful for me. And lastly, there's been a slowing down trend. It's going to be less so for these higher end machines, these Mac Silicon, but also is one of those things too where it's like, hey, if you think you're going to need more memory in the future, just upgrade more memory now. It helps out a lot. All right, Lightroom Classic. So with this, comparing the price between the two, yes, we are saving some time by like about close to like 4 minutes there. I don't think that is that big of a deal for that $500, but it even becomes more exacerbated when you really think about this machine right now like I said, at least in the US anyway, we find this machine for like $1,700. That price delta does not really justify this 4-minute variation, right? But let's see if in under tasks, if we're going to see that much more of a jump. Here are the rest of the other machines. And when it comes to exporting, we're about like 30 seconds, a little bit over, like about 40 seconds faster on this one. So the bump is not quite there, but then you have to ask, why would I go through this bump in order to gain a few more cores, both CPU and GPU? And that is to access more memory on the system, right? So these are things we have to remember when we're trying to configure a machine, because not everything is quite as straightforward as just going out there and buying a stock machine. If we're just talking about stock machines right now, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. What about HDR Merge in Lightroom Classic? Timing is exactly the same chip generation. This is using CPU and is really just using one core. Here are the rest. This is grouping by the generation of machines. So M4, M3, M2, and M1. You can see the grouping by the generations there. Lightroom Classic Panorama Merge. So we'll take a look at this. And the top spec is faster by a pretty good margin, but this is because it has more memory in the system for it to run. Sadly, when it comes to this one, there's no way to upgrade the memory. So if you want more memory, you have to go with the silicon upgrade in combination to get the memory upgrade anyway. But this shows you where the performance is when we really compare them. Here are the rest of the machines. And let's take a look at AI noise reduction. So the extra 8 GPU cores amount itself to around 3 seconds per image. I don't think this is a large variation that we want to really be concerned about, because if you are okay with like 36 gigabytes of memory, when you take a look at this, it's really not that big of a deal. But what happens when we start to compound things by doing a batch noise reduction of 10 images? So let's see there. We're talking about 30 seconds variation for this price tag. You start to get an idea, right? There's reason for you to upgrade to the top silicon, and that would be to get more memory, to add more memory to the system. But if you don't need that, I argue that this is a really sweet machine. So if you don't need to even bump the SSD up, I mean, heck, why not? The stock configuration is looking really awesome, especially with the sales that it has going on right now. Here are the rest of the other machines, and we're going to take a look at Lightroom AI Sky and subject masking. I would say for the most part, a second apart, these are just about the same. That gives you an idea for these 10 files. And let's take a look at Lightroom 8.2. This is export. So for this one, it's different than Classic. This one goes in and use CPU, GPU, and RAM all in combination. And the timing that we have for this is less than 30 seconds apart. So it's not that big of a deal there. Here are the rest of the other machines. Let's take a look at Capture One. So for Capture One, import. This is a CPU-based task. And less than 30 seconds. More like 18 seconds apart. Not that big of a deal, right? When you take a look at the numbers this way. Now, especially, I'm going to throw this one in there one more time. When you can get this machine at $1,700 is definitely not that big of a deal at all. All right. Here are the spread with the rest of the machine for import. What about for export? Having more GPU cores going to help? Yes, it does, but this equivocates itself to a little bit over 2 minutes. You have to really ask yourself if that extra 2 minutes is a worthwhile endeavor for you or not, for you to consider this kind of price bump, right? It really depends on where you are in your workflow. I know that there are many seasoned photographers that just want to get things done fast, and they just going to put the resources behind it, and they need more memory in the system, and it makes sense for them to go upgrade, but it's not for everyone. So these are things to really think about. Here are the rest of the export timing. And now let's take a look at a result from Photoshop. For this, I'm using digital Lloyd chamber test. Link to his test will be in the description. We're running these three. And first, let's start out with Photoshop speed. So with regards to these two, they're only milliseconds apart. At this time frame, you won't even know what really hits you. So I'm going to say for the most part, these are the same. Here are the rest of the machine and lineup. What happens when we work with Photoshop Medium, 15.7 gigabytes? Well, with this, all of it can literally be computed on the memory on the system already. So with that in mind, timing is literally about the same. Slightly slower, but at those milliseconds, again, you won't really know what hit you. So for the most part, this is performing fairly well. Now what happens when we work with a Photoshop huge file, 56 gigabytes? Well, there are starting to show time variation because that file is much larger than memory, so it has to page to the system, right? The more you have to page, the slower it just runs overall. It doesn't really matter how fast your SSD is, it just takes more time to compute because writing it to an SSD is actually much slower than just having this super high speed memory there on your system or just using your memory. But if we take a look at timing variation between these two, we're talking about 40 seconds, and not all of us run these tasks on a daily basis. If you run these every so often, it's only 40 seconds longer and it may not be that big of a deal. However, if you do this task on a daily basis, definitely consider upgrading more memory in your system. But it gives you an idea as far as the Photoshop performance, because most of what Photoshop is really doing is going in and using single core CPU anyway to compute. Now let's take a look at Fusion Bench Score. With this, it's really close to each other, around 550, 600 points apart. Not really that big of a deal at all when it comes to like the Photoshop bench score. Here are the rest of the computers in the lineup. And now let's take a look at Final Cut Pro encoder decoder engine. So for this, timing are exactly the same because these are both Mac Silicon. They all dip down into the encoder decoder engine, to which the Macs have double that of the Pro and the regular Silicon, which helps out a lot in terms of speed. Here's the rest for the comparison. I mean, obviously Ultra has double that of the Max, which is why it's shorter in timing. Here's the comparison for HEVC, identical. The rest of the computers in the lineup for HEVC, and also ProRes 422, which is pretty much exactly the same timing. So yeah, that gives you an idea as far as video work go, the timing are going to be very similar. Now let's take a look at AfterEffects Adobe Benchmark. I understand that there's more to just exporting files with AfterEffects, but this is one thing that I can do to determine objectively how they are performing. And when we take a look at this, yes, you are saving some time by close to a minute, not really quite there. But also remember this, right? We already seen this machine on sale for this much. It makes the justification less so unless you need more memory on your system. Here are the rest of the machines in the lineup. And we're going to take a look at Premiere using Fusion Bench Score. Some slight variation, although I would say it's fairly small for the most part. Not that big of a deal, right? And let's take a look at Resolve. Some minor variation, not that huge of a slowdown, I would say. So yeah, when we compare the top versus the base silicon, what are my thoughts? It depends on the task you do. It depends on your justification. It depends on where you are in your creative career. But if you can just go with just the stock base configuration, the one that it's going to be the most prevalent out there that's already on sale, I think that's a really compelling machine. And when we see it with the sale price, the justification for the upgrade makes it even more difficult to do so. But here's the thing. If you're constantly working with large files, you need a larger SSD, you start to build on the system in very different ways. You no longer have access to that discounted price because that one is only the configuration. It comes with 512 gigabyte SSD. The equations start to change. So it depends on where you are in your workflow. This is part of the reason why I say really think about what you do most in your workflow, because there's not like a real clear winner throughout. And if you want to go and like upgrade the memory in the system, you also have to upgrade the silicon with it, right? And you also pay that price bump. So it's not quite as easy as it was before, all these things. Now, if you're a new purchaser, like I said, I think if you're okay with a stock machine is a fantastic one to go with. But if you need to upgrade, hey, you know what? You need to upgrade. There's nothing really stopping you from doing that, but you no longer have the access to that benefit, and you're kind of almost forced into the silicon upgrade in order for you to get more memory on your system too. As far as upgrader go, I would just really see where you are right now and probably take a look at my full video to see how your machine is performing. If you're on the Intel generation, it's time to upgrade. If you're on the M1 generation, especially like M1 Max, it's probably time a little bit to think about upgrading. This might be a good time, or maybe wait till like the next one comes out, which the Studio, because it's not, you know, one of those machines that sells a lot like the Mac Mini, I think the upgrade cycle is going to be a little bit further apart, and it might just be a good time for you to jump in now and upgrade to the M4 Max. This is my thought. If you have, for example, the M2 generation, I think you're going to be perfectly fine. If you have the Ultra, we're not really talking about Ultra here, but I mean, you can upgrade, but you don't necessarily have to in a way. Upgrade priorities, as I said before, to get the most performance per dollar. Memory is going to give you that. You're linked in with the chip family when you do it. And then if you have extra money left, SSD storage, and then chip variants is going to give you like the least performance, but you're kind of locked into it. So there's not any other way to really do it. Here's the recommendation based on the app that you use, and you read good, better, best by going across this chart. So for Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, Pro is good, better would be the Max, the best would be the Ultra Silicon. Now, interestingly enough, if you're just really running a lot of Photoshop and like compute in Lightroom, Lightroom Classic, or Capture One, I think the M4 Max is really going to be a great silicon for this particular use. That's why I said the stock one is a really good one to think about. If you're doing video, Max can work just fine, although I would say Ultra is going to give you the benefit of that double encoder decoder engine, and it's going to help you too in terms of just working with your timeline, transcoding, and all those things and rendering. So with regards to RAM in the system, we're starting at least 36 and 48. I'm not worried about it. I'm not going to recommend you get any more unless you know you need more, but that's a good amount. And 512 is probably about the minimum SSD I would go with, although I can't live with 512. I need at least 1 terabyte. And I'm just going to say 1 terabyte is not a bad option to upgrade. So there's my thought on that one. As far as upgraders, if you're on Apple Silicon already, the best thing that you can do is pretty much just draw a circle where you are. Let's say you're with the M3 Pro right now, going to the M3 Max, M4 Max, or even going to like the M1 Ultra is going to give you a lot of benefit there. But in this case, we're talking about the Max, right? So let's say if you have like the M2 Max generation, there was never really an M3 Max Studio. So going to an M4, you can see some speed bump right there. Or you can also go with like the Ultra in both M2 or M3, or use, for example, even like M1 can benefit you quite well there. There's so many pathways to upgrade. I think it's, you know, one of those interesting times now, because there are some machines that are on clearance that some of the store have. You can get it from Apple Refurb. You can also find some of these machines in used market because there are people upgrading. I think there are a lot more options to get a machine at a really great price point that's even more of a bargain than what I just shared with you. But anyway, so yeah, that's my thought between the base silicon versus the top silicon. Sometimes you just have to upgrade to the top silicon in order for you to get more memory. But if you're okay, I think that base silicon is looking really good on the M4 Max Studio this time around. Anyway, I hope you find this helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please share them with me. Give this a like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you're new. I'm Art, and I thank you for your time.